Jersey and Massachusetts and New York, where the industrial plants were being built. Now, A, this was viewed as unfair, but B, more important, when the Bank of the United States came to town, it was like, for the local banks, it was like when Walmart comes to town in a small town here in the United States. If we were to go to Taylorville, which is okay if you've never heard of, which is where Mrs. Newman was raised, we can go around the square, around the courthouse, and Mrs. Newman can tell you what store used to be at that location before Walmart came to town and drove all the mom and pops out of business. Now it's used clothing, used books, used furniture. Notice the pattern here. Welfare, Veterans Administration. The bars are still there, but they're the only thing that continue. So state-based and locally, which is the more common instance-based banks, wanted the Bank of the United States to go away. And there were various methods to make the Bank of the United States go away. And the one that I was taught when I was in high school was McCulloch versus Maryland, which is our first case that we've got here. McCulloch versus Maryland, which dealt with two attempts on the part of Maryland to make the Bank of the United States go away. McCulloch is the cashier, which is chief operating officer of the Bank of the United States in Baltimore. Ultimately, he's going to steal all the gold in the bank and flee to Europe. It's just a sidelight. What happens after that? So Maryland took two different attacks on the Bank of the United States. The first, the one that we were taught, going back 55 years, was Maryland levied a tax on every transaction that you did with the bank. So if you make a deposit, you have to pay a tax. You make a payment on your mortgage, you have to pay a tax. You write a check, you have to pay a tax. You withdraw money from your savings account, you have to pay a tax. So the idea was to make it too expensive to use the Bank of the United States. So Greg Strobel, who taught me U.S. history many years ago, thundered, "The power to tax is the power to destroy," which decades later I can still remember. And that's what we will learn. And that was declared unconstitutional. Strobel was actually quoting from language of the opinion by John Marshall. But the other attack was the one that concerns us here. The idea that Congress did not have the power to create the Bank of the United States. Now, if you want to fancy this up after you get to law school, you call this ultra vires. And people will pay you like $300 an hour to consult you if you say things like ultra vires at them because they think that you're really smart. We will talk more about how lawyers are just as dumb as you and me to just hang around in the right places for a couple of 3 years. But that's down the line. So ultra vires, to illustrate, happily, and please don't make this happen. Happily, we do not have a boyfriend and a girlfriend in this classroom, do we? He said, hopefully. It happened. Okay, okay, good. That's very bad. When they break up, it's really, really bad, okay? Which is why I do not encourage that. But let's suppose that, you, as part of the mating dance I've seen play out already in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, you fixate on, look, it's happening, okay? I was watching this from the first day of class, and I said, damn, what does she see in him? Which is usually the way to go. So let's suppose somebody in one of my classes decides that some buddies in one of my classes decide they really, really want to get married, and they really want me to perform the ceremony. And I don't get my divinity decree from the internet like Joey Tribbiani when he married Monica and Chandler. Okay, I'm just here as a professional. Do I have the power to perform a binding marriage ceremony? Short answer is no. Long answer is hell no. Okay, so it's beyond my power. I don't have I have the power to do a bunch of other stuff, but I don't have the power to perform wedding ceremony, marriage ceremony. So when Maryland was making the argument that it was ultra vires for this Congress to create the Bank of the United States, Maryland was looking at that really long list of things Congress has the power to do. And nowhere on there is listed make a bank or even charter a corporation, because a bank is a subset of corporation. So Maryland is saying, hey, it's not on the list, you can't do it. John Marshall, who writes this opinion, famous Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall says, well, it's not on the listed, enumerated, as we say, powers, but it is, creation of a bank is something that would help some of the listed powers. Borrow money in the name of the United States, it helps to have a bank to borrow money from. Regulate commerce among the several states. If you've got a buyer in another state, it helps to have a bank with the ability to process checks from one to the other. And so Bank of the United States helps to regulate commerce. The Commerce Clause is the most common instance where a statute is justified. So the ruling in McCulloch versus Maryland is, even though it's not listed, because it's the magic phrase, reasonably related to one of the listed powers, Congress has the power to do whatever the good thing is. And if any of you end up in Congress or as an aide to a congressperson, that's the way you write a bill. Early on, you list. You say, this statute is reasonably related to that enumerated statute. And as I said, usually enumerated power. And as I said, that's usually going to be the Commerce Clause. Regulate commerce among the several states. Now, Heart of Atlanta Motel is sort of the high watermark of the Commerce Clause as justifying a statute. It deals with the Civil Rights Act of '64. Civil Rights Act of 1964, in pertinent part, said that if you operate a hotel or motel, you may not discriminate against people renting from you based on race and some other things, creed, color, national origin, that kind of thing, ethnicity. And the Heart of Atlanta Motel did not want to rent to black people, continuing a tradition which had been operating since about forever. And the '64 Civil Rights Act was justified as reasonably related to the Commerce Clause, reasonably related to regulating commerce between states, among the several states. And Heart of Atlanta Motel says, hey, we only operate, as our name indicates, in Atlanta. We are not like Marriott with a whole bunch of branches in various places. We are engaged in intrastate commerce, not interstate commerce. And the Supreme Court says that, well, you may not operate across state lines, but you affect what happens across state lines. Okay, I spent about an hour this morning just for looking on YouTube because there was a wonderful interview that was done on a television program about 40 years ago with a gospel group called the Fairfield Four, which got 5 members in it, where they were talking about how difficult it was to be black and travel across the South in the days before the Civil Rights Act of '64. Because not only did you not have hotels that would rent to you, most restaurants would not serve you. If they served you at all, you had to come to the back door. And most important, many of the gasoline stations would not sell you. That's, when I say that's most important, you had, above all, the plan that you had enough gasoline to get from one place that sold to black folk to the next place that sold to black folk, because you did not want to run out of gas on the back roads of the South in those days. So, although Heart of Atlanta Motel, like most service stations, only operates in one location, what it does affects people going across state lines, and because it affects the flow of commerce. The actions of Heart of Atlanta Motel are subject to regulation by the '64 Civil Rights Act. Let me pause here. Unfortunately, this is making perfect sense in my head, but I don't know if it's making sense in yours. Are you following me? Help me out here. I mean, is it making sense? Okay, I'm getting a doubtful shake of the head back there. Where did you fall off the truck? Either one, well, back row she was making noise, movements like this.
Well, I'm kind of confused, like, how does the motel affect the
Okay, we've talked about the professor who's going deaf because he was guarding your grandparents from Dallas County. Okay, you try it a little louder, please.
How does the motel, like, affect what happens across state lines?
Okay, let's suppose you want to travel to Florida. And I guess maybe you're young enough you could drive it in one fell swoop. But if you're my age, you want to stop after like 4 or 5 hours of driving, right? Because then you got to stay someplace. If the hotels and motels between here and Florida, or between here and Arizona, which is where we got one of my nieces and her children, then that affects my decision whether or not to travel to Arizona, doesn't it? But I have no place to stay. Trust me on this. You can't just decide to pull off by the side of the road and sleep and not have the highway patrol come along and say, "What are you doing?" So it's because the actions of the hotel affect people traveling across state lines that it affects the flow of commerce, even though they're just located in one place.
Yeah.
Now, there are limits to this Commerce Clause thing. And this is the other thing I spent this morning looking at. In 1995, the federal school safety zone statute, which said that penalties are doubled for possessing a firearm within something like 500 yards of the school. The federal statute was found unconstitutional because that statute was based on the Commerce Clause. And the thing is, local schools are just that. People don't decide that they're going to go to their local public school based upon can I get a room there or something like that. People go to their local school because it's their local school. Even if you went to an academy in U46, you're still going to a school in U46. And I don't know what St. Charles, do you have like schools in the St. Charles School District that are specialized as to what they teach? Like Larkin over here. Larkin, you still got the theater thing? Mm-hmm. Okay. And South Elgin's got the broadcast. Say again?
Got Beacon.
That's South Elgin, though.
Yeah.
Okay. South Elgin's got Beacon, which is broadcast, for those of you who don't know what that is. Which I didn't until I had to explain to me. But you're still in your school district, your local school district. It's not like you're saying, I know what let's do. Let's go to Barrington in 220 so we can feel like we're rich. Or Stevenson or New Trier so we can feel like we're smart. Notice I'm making a distinction there. If you want to go teach in secondary school, Barrington School District 220, the parents, I say this as somebody whose mother and sister-in-law taught in 220 for 44 and 34 years respectively. The parents will bring their lawyers to the parent-teacher conference. So you really, really don't want to teach at 220. Except they tape it at everybody else, so maybe. So anyway, that's still a localized decision, yes.
Why would they bring their lawyers?
Because their little darlings can do no wrong. Their little darlings want to take naked pictures of themselves and send it to their opposite numbers and then circulate those amongst their friends. That's nothing wrong. My baby can't do that. The worst example, Allison, was a kid who had a .22 rifle in downtown Barrington sniping at passing cars. And Mommy and Daddy brought a lawyer a lot of places, obviously, but brought a lawyer to the middle school saying, you can't suspend my baby because he was just expressing his creativity.
It's a work of art. What do you mean? The little inside play, guys.
Obviously, you have not had the joy of meeting Barrington. I could go on and some for about 30 years by October break. I mean, we moved. My family moved to Barrington 3 weeks before I started undergraduate school. So I was away for the next 30 years in the Army, in grad school, at undergrad. practicing law downtown, but for purposes of voting and the driver's license, I lived in Barrington, so that's what we call a home of record in the Army. And so I've had some experience in dealing with these people, and God, I sure as hell didn't measure up in their estimate. So anyway, that's what's wrong with them. They know they're better than we are. You'll run into this with some of my colleagues here, not all, but some of my colleagues think that they are God, and they will tell you that they are God. I don't know who the hell that is out there looking puzzled in my drawer. Is there somebody out there who really wants to get in here?
They're walking away.
Okay, I did. You know, it's not that fascinating. The window in the door is not that fascinating, so okay. When that happens, people worry.
Maybe he was lost and wanted to see, like, if you were alone and you could, like, come and ask for directions, but rather than interrupt their class, so he's going to go find out something interrupt.
I think he's just easily puzzled and confused, but that was a good save of his intellectual level. Okay, so elastic clause, that's a big thing. Honest to God, that's a big thing. And we should be aware of it. And if you look at the Constitution on its face, it's not obviously apparent. This is one of the places where you've got to have a bunch of Supreme Court decisions that explains what it means to you. Sometimes we're going to skip Riders. We're going to come back to Riders later on. Riders reappear in this course a lot for some reason. I wasn't thinking about that. Sometimes Congress will do something and they'll pin a label on it. And by pinning a label on it, Congress tries to pretend that what they did, and I'll give you a couple of examples in a second, a bill. Now, we've just gone through all the steps of how a bill becomes a law, and they're very well set out. But sometimes Congress doesn't want to go through all that hassle. Now, INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service, the predecessor agency to ICE, INS versus CHADA deals with something called legislative veto, which has been around for 50 years at the time this decision came down. Legislative veto operated as follows. It'll become apparent when I go and get back to CHADA what's happening. Legislative veto, if either the House or the Senate disapproves of a ruling that you made as an agency, then a simple majority of either the House or the Senate can reverse that decision. Okay, what the hell is he talking about? All right, Mr. Chadha, the INS, wanted to deport Mr. Chadha back to Kenya. And Mr. Chadha must have been owed some favors by folks in the House, because the House, by a simple majority, said, Mr. Chadha gets to stay here. It overruled the INS deportation decision. And the INS filed a lawsuit because they felt that Mr. Chadha should, in fact, go back to Kenya. And Congress attempted to argue that, hey, it's not a bill, we're just exercising a legislative veto. They're pinning a label on an action which really has the same substance as passing a bill. At the congressional level, not at the state level, at the congressional level, you can pass bills about a particularly named person or company or city. They're called private legislation. And we actually see this sometimes, private bills passing and being signed by the president, granting citizenship, which is really what Mr. Chadha is going for. I don't mean to be cynical, but we see this a lot during Olympic years, where people defecting from another country are suddenly magically given citizenship in the United States just in time to qualify for the Olympic Games. The best example is the great South African miler Sidney Maree, A-R-E-E, who was, as I said, from South Africa, but he was black, which meant that he could not compete. Those were the days of apartheid in 1976. So Sidney Maree was going to college here, and he's one of the best damn milers in the world. And so he said, gee, I'd like to compete in the Olympics, and I would compete for the United States if you would give me citizenship. So we passed a bill that said Sidney Maree is now a citizen of the United States. He took, I believe, fourth at the Montreal Games. It was 1,500 meters. And we see this from time to time. It's not as obvious, like the country of Qatar with a Q. made the entire Bulgarian weightlifting team, citizens of Qatar, just in time to compete in the '92 Olympics. And did a lot better than the Qataris had done before, I'll say that. Of course, I don't think they competed before weightlifting. So the Supreme Court said, hey, what you're doing is effectively passing a bill without having to go through all these steps that we've got on the board. And you cannot change the substance of your action just by painting a different label on it. So if a bill is legislative in effect, that's the magic phrase, if it has the same effect as a bill, Congress has to go through all the steps. They can't just pin a different label on what they were doing and saying, hey, it's not a bill, we don't have to go through this. Comptroller versus Saynar, same sort of thing. They dealt with the first version of Graham, Rudman, and Hollings. You don't have to know this, don't worry about it. Part of my corporate law days. Graham, Rudman, and Hollings is the first balanced budget statute, which said that if the U.S. budget is out of balance, the comptroller of the currency has to cut by the appropriate percentage to balance the budget each check he writes. So it has the effect of amending the appropriations bill without saying, oh, we're going to cut funding to welfare or to the military or whatever. We're just going to say, magically, you have to cut by whatever percentage is required to bring the statute or bring the budget back into balance. And again, the Supreme Court said, hey, if you're going to amend the appropriations bill, you got to amend the appropriations bill. You can't just say magically, hey, we're going to have the effect of doing an amendment and cutting funding without having to bite the bullet and make people mad at you for cutting funding. Of course, those are the days when we thought you had to have a budget in order to operate a governmental entity, and as we know here in Illinois, you can go 2 damn years without a budget, can't you? But as we've seen with the agonies over the school funding, there are hard choices to be made. One I was not aware of that you may have noticed, probably not, because I sort of haunt the news stations, and I'm pretty sure you have other things in life to do. But there are a number of construction projects at the 4-year universities in this state which will never happen because the funding to build at Western and Champaign and UIC was cut out of the school funding bill so that we can increase spending K through 12. Okay. So, other functions. What are some other functions that happen? Let's see. Punishment for contempt. All right. I know most, if not all of us, have contempt in the colloquial sense for Congress. But contempt of Congress legally is a very technical animal. It requires that certain things happen. You have to be subpoenaed to testify before Congress. And I'll be honest with you, it's okay if you don't have all these steps, because it's just a nightmare. It's like trying to program in a new programming language you're unfamiliar with, which is why I get my granddaughters to do it for me. So you're subpoenaed to testify as a witness. You refuse to testify. You're immunized. Usually you refuse because you say it would tend to incriminate me. You stand on the Fifth Amendment. You're immunized, so the Fifth Amendment is not in play. You can't be tried criminally because you've been immunized for your testimony. And if you still refuse to testify, Congress can pass a resolution saying you're in contempt of Congress. They will lock you up until you agree to testify, or until such time as the Congress adjourns, which we've already gone over, which could be a while. Now, in the news media, what often happens, not often, but sometimes happens, is that reporters refuse to reveal their sources, and they can't say Fifth Amendment, so they just go straight to contempt of Congress under those circumstances. For example, 2 reporters had a story last week in regard to Harvey that there are a number of serious, what they call Superfund toxic waste dumps that have been flooded by Harvey, which means that what used to be underground is now out in the groundwater. And the EPA denied that. And then they pulled their denial off the websites because people said, look, here it is, and look, there's water over it. So, yeah. But if those two reporters were called in before the environmental protection, the environmental committees on either the House or the Senate side, and questioned about their sources for that story, then the reporters would probably refuse to say, these are the people who told me about this. Then they can't, they're fired. And so at that point, they'd be locked up for contempt of Congress. And they're going to stay locked up until they agree to testify. It's sort of a badge of honor in journalism to be locked up. But it gets old being in jail in D.C. Back in the early 50s, the FBI, I'm not making this next bit up. Back in the 1950s and 40s and 30s, the FBI did not believe that there was organized crime in the United States. Honest to God. Until 1957. And so a senator started a series of hearings into organized crime in the United States in 1953, and he'd bring in mafiosi and swear them in, and they get immunized. They do the Fifth Amendment, then get immunized, and then they'd be found in contempt of Congress, and they get locked up. Now, if you remember the mafia, they have this thing called the code of silence, where if you break it, they torture you to death. So I understand why the mafiosi refused to testify. There's no blow torture; they're not a happy way to die. But they stayed locked up for better than a year until that Congress adjourns. So, punishment for contempt. That's one thing Congress did. Both the House and the Senate. Judging the elections and qualifications of members. Qualifications of members are basically, are you old enough? That's pretty much it now. The House has got a lower limit. You got to be at least 25 to be in the House. You got to be at least 30 to be in the Senate. Elections. Sometimes elections are very close, and they count it, and it comes out one way, and they count it, and it comes out another way. Lyndon Johnson, when he was elected to the Senate in Texas, won by 47 votes. As an example of a very close election, too close to call. And so what happened there was the U.S. Senate sent a committee to go watch the ballots, be counted one more time, and come back and report who won. So that's judging the election. Disciplining members. Under the Constitution, 2/3 of the House or 2/3 of the Senate may expel a member from the House or Senate, as the case may be. That's in the Constitution. Happened a lot with senators and representatives from former Confederate states during the early Reconstruction. Because the guys in Congress who had just been part of a war, many of the members of Congress had been seriously wounded in the war, saw the people who were responsible for their friends and family being killed and themselves being horribly scarred sitting across the chamber there, so they decided to get rid of it. Hasn't happened very much since then. And an attempt to exclude rather than expel by a simple majority was found unconstitutional in 1965 when the House tried to condemn a guy named Adam Clayton Powell. And that's again, Congress puts a different label on something and says, hey, it's not really expulsion, it's exclusion. We're not excluding him, we're not expelling him, we're just excluding him by a simple majority. And the Supreme Court said, hey, Powell versus McCormick, you gotta let him in. So that's discipline. They can throw you out. Constitution says they can't. The other two kinds of discipline are not so rigorous, as we say in the land. You can be reprimanded. If you are reprimanded, a majority of your chamber votes to say you've been bad, and the person in charge of your chamber, the Speaker of the House or the Vice President, the President of the Senate, writes you a letter saying, you have been bad, don't do it. That's the extent of it. Sort of like, I guess your generation's got timeouts instead of being sent to stand in the corner. But the same principle. If you were to send somebody in Congress for a timeout, it wouldn't really affect their behavior very much, I would think. Actually, I don't think it would probably affect the behavior of anybody here. So that's reprimand. Censure, C-E-N-S-U-R-E, is a little bit more serious. Censure, you have to stand in front of the chamber after you've been voted to be censured for your misconduct. You have to stand in front of the chamber and have to listen to the letter be read to you out loud. And I didn't find this out until Newt Gingrich was threatened with censure and he plea bargained down to reprimand. And you also lose your leadership position. So Gingrich was Speaker of the House, and if the House had censured him, he would have lost his speakership. So he said, I'll pay back the money I took as a fee, wink, wink, from a guy whose application to purchase broadcast stations, radio and television was under consideration by the House, wink, wink. So he paid the money back and plea bargained down to reprimand. Censure, you lose your leadership position. But other than that, the embarrassing part is you got to stand up in front of everybody and have your misdeeds read out loud. Yes, ma'am.
Can you respell that word, the word again?
C-E-N.
Okay.
S-U-R-E. Censure.
Thank you.
I guess that's one of those words they don't use very much anymore.
Yeah.
That's okay. Hey. Probably they don't use words like malefactors anymore, do they? No. Malefactor is the wrong word. Malefactor is the word. If they ever start replaying Heat of the Night on MeTV, you can watch Carol O'Connor play Gilgamesh, characters like that, malefactors and so forth. Endurance Vow. I love that one. So in '86, you had two members of the House of Representatives separately, for obvious reasons that we'll develop, who discovered that if you take a 16-year-old and feed that person lots of beer, lots and lots and lots of beer, you can have your way with them. So Daniel Crane, the answer to your next question is Congress lowered the age of consent to 16 with an EC. Daniel Crane, who was a congressman from downstate Illinois, did this with a 16-year-old high school girl who was a page and got caught, and he was censured, and he was not reelected, but I think that had more to do with Mrs. Crane than anything else. And he gave one of these typical speeches about, he had Buster Lincoln here on his desk on the TV, and picture of the family and the dog over here, and said, our Lord says that you can turn the cheek not 7 times, but 70 times 7. I know he was thinking in his head. He was counting how many times did I have sex with that girl, and how many more I left. He was pretty sure that was what was in his head. And he was cheerful, but he was not reelected. Jerry Stubbs, with 2 D's and S, the first openly gay member of Congress, got a 16-year-old boy drunk and had sex with him and got caught. It was censured, and was reelected 6 times. Yeah, I'm not a big backer of guns, as we'll develop. I can't hit shit with a rifle or a pistol. I'm really good at adjusting artillery fire. But under those circumstances, I start pricing, shotguns at Cabela's and wondering about a hacksaw to hack off the barrel so I don't have to aim very well. Impeachment. Okay. The last thing we will consider today, which will require thought on your part. Impeachment, everybody gets loose in their terminology. Technically, impeachment is like indictment. Technically, 2/3 of the House votes to find probable cause to impeach an official. And then that official is tried in the Senate, and it takes 2/3 of the Senate to convict and remove from office. But we all use impeachment. When I say we all, I mean all of us in the Political Science Association. We all use impeachment as sort of this blanket term for bringing them in and getting them out. 2 presidents have been impeached, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, speaking of sex. And neither was convicted and removed from office. 7 federal judges have been impeached and convicted and removed from office for bribery. And that's one of the 3 grounds for impeachment that's in the Constitution, Article 1. Bribery. You take something of value to betray your office. That's bribery. Take money, if you're an inspector for Chicago, to give a use permit, even though you haven't inspected to see is the electric system doing okay, is the plumbing system doing okay. Is the porch, the balcony sufficiently constructed that people can walk on it and not fall down and kill themselves and people underneath it? That happened. Actually, I should have looked that up. It was a Labor Day weekend about 6 years ago. A balcony collapsed, and the inspector who certified it was 21 and had no background in construction or engineering or anything. It's just his dad was in the Democratic Party. So if you take a bribe to say, yeah, you can have people go to the E2 nightclub, which used to be on the South Loop, and I'm going to certify it as safe even though all the exits but one are chained shut. And 20 plus people died in a stampede when it wasn't a fire, it was a stampede from a fight on the dance floor. Or alternatively, if you give, don't do this because they will bust your ass in real life, but if you give a bribe of $50 or $100 to a state trooper not to give you a speeding ticket, that's taking something of value to betray your office. You should give a speeding ticket. You're not going to give a certificate of use. So bribery, that's one of the bases, grounds for impeachment. Treason is defined in the Constitution. Treason is defined in the Constitution as either giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war, or making war on the United States while a citizen thereof. That's why all of my mother's side of the family were guilty of treason during the war of what they still call northern aggression in my family in the South. And here's the one that came into play with Clinton and Johnson. And you've got the third grounds of high crimes or misdemeanors, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, misdemeanor is junior varsity crime. I think that was thrown in there basically to make it look like it was complete. There is, honest to God, an anti-ugly statute ordinance here in Elgin. It is illegal for ugly people to be on the streets of Elgin after 9 p.m. It would cost too much to get it off the books, and I have indebted Laurel Beatson over as a paralegal that found it way back there. So let us suppose, arguably, that the current President of the United States comes to give one of his pep rallies in Hemmons, and it runs past 9, and he's out on the streets. Is that an impeachable offense? Probably not. Probably, yeah, I know. That was my reaction to it. Probably not. But what's a high crime? Yes, sir.
Bombs?
Bombs? Well, I'm assuming you're talking about bombs amongst the citizenry in time of peace, because Lord knows our presidents have bombed the hell out of enemy targets as long as we've had an Air Force. Yes, sir.
Having non-consensual sex with.
Are we saying raping people?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't like that.
Well, you don't like the act, I would suspect.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Okay, rape. That would probably be a high crime. It hadn't actually come up in the presidential circle, I think. Let me give you something to think about. I'll give you something to think about. And we'll take this up when we come back next Monday. Once upon a time, there was a king of England, and his name was Henry II. And Henry II came to the throne as a young man. So he partied down. That's what young men do. He broke all of the 10 Commandments. He committed all of the 7 deadly sins, and then some. And while Henry was partying, his running buddy was Thomas of Becket, who was the Chancellor of England at that time. And so Henry, because the Archbishop of Canterbury